What's up, everybody? How y'all doing? Welcome to a special edition of the Overstated NBA show. As you can see, it's just me, Brett, chilling here solo. As a lot of you know, we had some technical difficulties with our usual weekly episode, which drops on Monday. Essentially, we lost most of my audio. It's my own fault. I plugged in my computer while we were recording, and the moment I did that, I got booted from the recording session, but there was no notification telling us that, so we recorded for like another hour with my screen frozen and my audio not being picked up. But again, we didn't know that when we were doing it. I only found out the next morning when I went to edit it, and as you can imagine, I was very frustrated by that development. So I was really only able to salvage about the first 10 minutes of the episode. We did post that on our YouTube channel, but unfortunately we lost most of it. So with that in mind, I wanted to just put out some more content for you guys, keep everyone engaged. And there's a topic I really want to talk about. Not that it hasn't already been talked about enough in the last month or so, but that's the MVP race. And we'll get into why I find this worthy of discussing. But first, I need to tell you that the Overstated NBA show is brought to you by Manscaped, the absolute best in the world in male grooming. They create precision tools specifically designed for all your male grooming needs, namely that of the below the belt variety. Again, as I've said on previous episodes, like these tools they're like specialists. You know what I mean? Like in the NBA, okay, for example, you've got specialists. All right. If you need a 3-pointer, okay, do or die, you're going with a specialist. You're going with a 3-point specialist. You're not having your big bruising, interior focused center out there shooting the three. You want somebody that does that well, that's designed for that job. And I know the league is changing and some of these centers can shoot, but you know what I mean. And that's the same with grooming, okay? You don't want to use the same shit you use on your head or on your face down there. Why would you do that? Why not get something that's specifically designed for that job? And that's exactly what Manscaped provides. What they sent us is called the Perfect Package 3.0, and it's a great way to get started with their products. It includes the lawnmower, which is a trimmer, super badass trimmer. It's got all kinds of cool features. I mean, the thing's waterproof. You can use it in the shower. I wouldn't have even thought that was possible with something like this, that it could be waterproof, but it is. It's got an LED light that makes things a lot more visible and a lot easier. It's really quiet. I think Steve pointed that out on a previous ad read, which is nice. It's very quiet. It doesn't vibrate a lot. And most importantly, it's not going to nick you down there. I have had a couple of bad experiences with that in the past, and it is not fun. I was traumatized by it. I really was. It like, even to this day, just thinking about it is like, whew. I mean, it's one thing to nick your neck or your face when you're shaving or something, but when you see your nuts bleeding, I mean, it's a whole nother story. I mean, that's why Gordy and Stand By Me passed out after them leeches. If that had bit him on his arm or his face or something, he probably would have been fine. But when he saw his nuts were bleeding, he lost it and he fainted. And I almost did too when it happened to me. So if it hasn't happened to you, don't let it. Use the proper tools for the job. Use Manscaped. That the importance of using the correct tools for this particular job cannot be overstated. Speaking of overstated, it's not only what we call our podcast, but it is also a discount code that you can use at manscaped.com for 20% off of their products as well as free shipping. Okay, that's a pretty good deal. 20% off plus free shipping with the code Overstated, OVERSTATED at manscaped.com. I couldn't recommend their products more highly. Check it out. Do yourself a favor. I'm telling you, these are those things that you don't realize how much you need them until you finally use them. and then you'll wish you had done it sooner. So again, promo code Overstated, 20% off, free shipping, manscaped.com. Go check it out. Anyway, back to the podcast. MVP. Okay. I think we can all agree that it's been talked about a lot, the MVP race. And the first question we need to ask ourselves is why this season has it seemingly at least been talked about a lot more and a lot earlier than in past seasons. And I think there's a few reasons for this potentially. One could be that this regular season, maybe to some people, is a little underwhelming. I mean, anybody who's paying attention knows that shooting percentages have been up league-wide, probably because of the absence of fans. But if we're talking about the overall quality of play, maybe that hasn't been as appealing to some people as in years past. There's been a lot of blowouts. It just feels a little different, whatever that means. So perhaps, a less desirable product on the court is by default making a topic such as the MVP race a little more appealing in comparison. So that could be it for sure. Could this be being fueled by social media? Okay, I know social media is not brand new. It's been around for a while, but honestly a relatively short while, and it's sort of reached new heights, and it's always reaching new heights, and there's always new platforms and new ways for people to argue and talk and have hot takes and everything, and that could be a big part of it. The whole Twitter thing, the whole Facebook thing, maybe that's fueling this and leading more people to talk about it. And again, social media has been around for a little while, but maybe this is the first time there's been an MVP race that's close enough, that's compelling enough, that we really see the effect that social media has had on the way that it's discussed. So I think that could certainly be it. And yeah, it's a close race. I think that is probably the biggest thing. I think it's one of the closest races ever, and we can get into that a little bit more later. But then diving into that, it's like, why is it so close this year? Like, what's making it so close? Could it be that, if you look at the absolute best teams in the league, they don't have necessarily a clear, easy choice candidate. So you can't necessarily just go like best player, best team like they have in so many years past. And more on that, like if you're looking at team records, right? Like, again, that's always a huge part of this. But in this season where we've had so many postponed games earlier in the season, thankfully we haven't had any in a while, and I don't think we're going to have very many more coming up, but we have had a lot of postponements. We have had a lot of absences, whether that's from injuries, whether that's from COVID. A lot of guys have missed time, and just all these things have affected teams' records to the point where there are a handful of teams who are significantly better than their records would suggest, and a handful of teams that are significantly worse than their records would suggest. And so maybe when we look at the whole thing, records don't matter as much. So like maybe this year a guy from a 6 or 7 seed is a lot more likely to win the award than he would have been in years past, and that could be making the whole thing a lot closer. I mean, is this overall criteria changing? Like, okay, aside from just the team records, like, is it becoming more nuanced? Are we looking more at advanced stats now? I don't think advanced statistics have ever been a very big part of the MVP voting criteria, but just in conversations that I've had and other podcasts that I've heard, it seems like that's being looked at a lot more. And, perhaps the apparent parity of this year's race will necessitate a level of nuance in the voting process never before factored in. Maybe this is going to be a turning point, and maybe we as basketball fans can sense that a little bit, and maybe that's why we all seem to be so much more invested in this MVP race, and again, so much earlier in the season than we have in other years. I think a lot of times And before I did this, I went back through the history of, say, the last 25, I guess 30 years of MVP races. And so many years, it just came down to two players. Okay. And if you ask most people, what are the closest MVP races of all time, they're going to point to these him versus him, kind of neck and neck races. This one right now, as we'll get into, I'm going to go through about 9 players here, exactly 9 players, not about, I have them listed. And I'm not saying all 9 of them are legitimate contenders at this point. I don't think we can rule any of them out. I'll put it that way. And as far as legit MVP contenders, depending on a couple of things, injuries and how those unfold, I think there's probably like 6 guys right now. Okay. And it's going to get narrowed down. It always does. But I could see us coming to the end of the regular season and there's like 4, which would be more than there's ever been in the past. And again, I'll get into that later, maybe after I go through some of these guys. And when I'm saying like legit MVP candidates, I'm saying guys that are going to get like double-digit first-place votes, right? That's kind of how I look at it. And we'll get into that more later. But anyway, and I don't want this to go too long. Again, this is just kind of a bonus episode. I'm here on my own. I don't know how long I can talk for. We'll see. But so bear with me. I'm going to go through some of these guys. And this is going to be in no particular order. I really just wrote them down in a random order and then looked up some stats for them. And we'll just kind of go through it real quick. Again, this is not in any kind of order at all. These are just kind of the 9 main candidates that I came up with. And I apologize for looking down and away from the camera. I've got another computer screen down here with the stats pulled up on it. I like to be able to see myself on camera for whatever reason. So I didn't want to pull the stats up on the computer that I'm recording the video from. So I've got another one right down here in front of it. You can probably see it right there. And when I look down, I'm just going to be looking at that. So I apologize. I got to find out a better way to do this. Again, this is my first solo video podcast I've ever done. My setup here, my little studio, it is a work in progress. You should see it. It's coming together, but it's still a little bit on the janky side, but it's getting there and it'll get better. But anyway, without further ado, LeBron James. And again, I'm going to round up or round down the numbers. Okay. So they're just even numbers as far as the basic counting stats. And then I'm just going to hit on a couple of, true shooting, PER, team record, just the basic stuff. Okay, I'm not going to dive too deep into the impact metrics and the advanced analytics. I'll leave that for people like Jacob. I'm not convinced that stuff is going to be a huge factor quite yet. I think we're getting to that point, but I still think counting stats, team records, above all else, are king. And speaking of kings, the self-proclaimed king, LeBron, 25, 8, and 8. 60% true shooting, a PER of 24.8, which is actually the second lowest since his rookie season. He only had one other season since then that was lower. I think it was his 3rd season when he was with the Cavs. So not great in the PER department, and that's not a perfect stat by any means. It's just kind of an all-encompassing reflection of counting stats, I guess. His defense has been really good. That's something I should certainly point out. I would say his defense was really good last year, and it has been as well this year. The Lakers are the best defensive team in the league. And LeBron, until recently, has been there pretty much the whole time. We know that he suffered an injury, a high ankle sprain, a few games ago, and it sounds like he's going to be out about a month, which is obviously very significant in this MVP conversation. In all likelihood, it will cost him a chance at this, but LeBron is a beast. Okay, a crazy stat that I heard is that he has had 137, and I guess 138 now with this. I don't think I updated that in my head. Documented injuries since he's been in the NBA, between 25 and 30 of which have been ankle sprains. Okay, he's missed 9 total games prior to this one with those ankle sprains. So I guess he's up to about 13 with maybe like 27 ankle sprains. So on average, he doesn't even miss a game, which is crazy. So he's a beast. He could come back sooner. If he does, he'll be in a great position to potentially win this award. If he is out a month, I would say it's very, very unlikely. But again, he's having a great season on one of the best teams in the league. But I don't think, as much as he'd like to win MVP, I don't think it's priority number one for him right now. It's all about the titles at this point. With LeBron, he's got nothing else to prove in terms of like individual accolades. So yeah. And then next on my list is the reigning MVP, Giannis Antetokounmpo, 29, 12, and 6. That's 29 points, 12 rebounds, and 6 assists per game. Again, rounded up or rounded down. The assists it's actually slightly above 6, and it is a career high. 63% true shooting, 29.2 PER. His PERs are just always insane. He's a statistical monster. I would say he probably had a stronger case last season, but because sort of the field has gone down a little bit, I still think he's one of the main contenders. And I mean, the field has grown, but I would say there's no like monster, like clear cut one or two candidates this year. Like he's kind of, I don't think he's having quite as great of a season as last year, but and then, and his defense is a big factor in this too. I think that's what separates him from a lot of the guys that we're going to talk about. He's still, a top 5 defender, I would say, in the NBA. The Bucks defense has been great when he's actually on the court. And their record, I feel like people have considered them a disappointment this season, but they're 28-14. Okay. They're third in the East, but they're just behind Brooklyn and Philly. And those three are, head and shoulders above the rest of the conference. And the Bucks have won 9 of their last 10. A lot of that does have to do with the return of Drew Holiday, but Giannis deserves a lot of credit too. So yeah, he's got to be one of the top contenders, even if he's not having quite as good of a season as last year. It's close. It's really close. I mean, it's still a historically great individual season, especially when we're talking about the stats. And if the Bucks continue to do what they've been doing the past few weeks and say they move into that first place in the East, I know everybody thinks it's unlikely that they would give it to Giannis 3 years in a row because everyone's like, oh, it's all about the narrative. My thing is this. I think that's kind of a cool narrative, winning 3 MVPs in a row. Nobody's done it since Larry Bird, and I believe Giannis would only be the 4th player ever to do it. Definitely can't count him out. There's like voter fatigue, I guess, is something that gets talked about a lot with him. But if his numbers continue to go up a little bit and the Bucks finish with that top seed in the East, his case is going to be pretty undeniable. That's the reality of it. On to the next one. Damian Lillard. Dame time. My guy. I'm rooting for him to win MVP, to be clear. Absolutely, as a lot of my listeners and people in our Facebook group for sure know how I feel about Dame Lillard. Check out his numbers. 30 points, 4 rebounds, 8 assists per game, 63% true shooting, 26.9 PER. Those latter two are both career bests. He's making 4.3s a game on 38%. There's a guy that we'll talk about later that makes a little more on a little bit better of a percentage. It's probably obvious to you who that is, but still, that's pretty insane when you consider the defensive attention that Dame gets. The Blazers are 6th in the West at 25-18, and this despite missing CJ McCollum for 25 games, Yusuf Nurkic for 31 games, Zach Collins, who would have been their starting power forward both last year and this year. Sadly, he cannot shake the injury bug. He has missed the whole season so far. So despite all those absences, the Blazers, let's not think too much about the 6th in the West thing because that doesn't sound great, but the 25-18, come on. The biggest component of Damian's MVP case, in my opinion, is the clutch factor, which is what he's known for. It's what he was known for before this season. And I think an important thing with these MVP discussions is like when you have a perception of a guy going into the season and then they sort of confirm that, it's like, because, and especially something like clutch shooting or clutch scoring, because that can vary quite a bit from year to year. There are tons of examples. I think John Morant is a great example I heard brought up on some other podcast, but he, was one of the most clutch players in the league last year, and this year he hasn't been, and there's a lot of guys that happens with, but Dame is consistently clutch, and this season he's having probably the most clutch, and by clutch, I'm using the NBA's definition of games within 5 points with 5 minutes or fewer remaining, not to mention just the game winners he hits, like the obvious clutch stuff. But I think, based on those things, he's having probably the most clutch regular season in NBA history. I think that's totally reasonable to say. His numbers in the clutch are absurd. His usage percentage is 38. His true shooting percentage is 79 in those clutch situations. Okay. He has a 130 offensive rating, and his net rating in the clutch is plus 30. That's beyond belief. He leads the league in total points in the clutch with 128, which is 12 more than second place. Zach LaVine, who has 116, even though he's played, I think, 8 more minutes than Dame total in the clutch this season. So what Damian's doing in the clutch is just, it's beyond belief. And again, I think that's the strongest component of his MVP case. Okay, you guys have heard enough about Dame, not just now, but always for me. So we'll move on. Nikola Jokic. Okay, this dude is absolutely insane. Look, I knew his numbers were ridiculous, but when I was doing some research for this podcast, I was just like, oh my God. I mean, not just how ridiculous his numbers are, but just how large the jump is that he's taken in a statistical sense from last year when he was also phenomenal. I mean, his scoring average has jumped like 8 points a game. 27 points, 11 rebounds, 9 assists per game. Again, just round it up, keep it simple. 65% true shooting, 31.9 PER. You know what that is? That's the highest of all time. If it were to stand, that is the highest PER ever recorded in the NBA. More than Jordan, more than Wilt, slightly more than Giannis last season, who is the current record holder. 31.9 PER. Oh my God. Whew. Man. Career bests across the board. Okay, in most categories, shooting efficiency, points, rebounds, assists, just across the board. It's wild because he's already been pretty darn good in years past, and he's just taken it to another level. The question is not what advanced stats he leads the league in. It's which advanced stats doesn't he lead the league in. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but the Joker does lead the league in VORP. It's value over replacement player. And if you can't tell, I'm kind of going off Basketball Reference. That's my favorite site to look at. I know there are other good metrics elsewhere, but I'm trying to keep this relatively simple. So when I do talk about these sort of advanced stats, these are just from Basketball Reference. VORP is a B-Ball Reference classic. He leads the league in that. He leads the league in box plus minus. He leads the league in win shares per 48 minutes, and of course, PER. And the Nuggets, again, similarly to the Bucks, where it's kind of like got this vibe of a disappointing season. And yeah, it's been a little disappointing to me. I predicted them to finish first in the West prior to the season. Now, we can't rule that out because everything's pretty close in the West. But currently they are in fifth, just ahead of the Blazers with a record of 26-17. So that's not going to preclude them from winning MVP in itself. That's a perfectly fine record, and I do expect that to get better. I think they're going to be one of the stronger second half teams in the NBA. And the last thing I'll say about Jokic, the only, I would say, weakness in his MVP case is defense. I know this is kind of a controversial topic, Jokic's defense, but he's not a good defensive player. I'll just leave it at that. But hey, that hasn't stopped certain other guys from winning it in the past. Harden's won it. Steph's won it. So, defense is never the number one thing. And if he's doing enough on offense to put together an elite team, and I mean, again, his offensive numbers are just absurd. Next guy up is James Harden. He beat my Blazers last night. I won't get into some of the controversial things that happened, but he had a good game. He had 17 assists. I believe that was a career high. And after that game, there was definitely some talk about like, okay, is he a legit MVP candidate? Well, I mean, he's in the conversation. Okay. 25 points, 8 rebounds, 11 assists, leads the league in assists. Excuse me. Let me get a sip of my coffee here. Shout out to Denny's. Some great advice on the back of this cup, too. It says, anything can be solved over a stack of pancakes. It's true. Keep that in mind. Back to the beard. 25, 8, and 11, leads the league in assists. 62% true shooting. Pretty solid. 24.3 PER, which is actually the lowest PER he has recorded since 2013-14. His clutch numbers are fantastic. I would argue probably second only to Lillard. And again, this could be one of the bigger components of his MVP case as well. He is, he's on 36 usage in the clutch and 71% true shooting. So just a shade below Dame in those departments, and also lower volume, I guess, overall than Lillard. He's just played less minutes in the clutch, but he's had a lot of success when he's been there. And the Nets are second place in the East at 30-14. This despite Kevin Durant missing 25 games. Kyrie has missed a good handful on the season, although a lot of those were from before Harden got there, but he has missed the last couple. So that's another good part of his case, is the success of the Nets. He's kind of been at least since he's been there, kind of the steady constant on that squad. I would say the biggest knock on his case is the Houston shit. He only played 8 games with the Rockets this season, but we all know sort of how everything went down there with him showing up late to training camp and basically forcing his way out. And just, look, guys do this. It happens. Guys want to get traded. It happens all the time. But I think he could have handled it a lot better. And I wonder if just that, that little period of time in itself could sort of disqualify him from this award. But regardless, he's in the conversation. He's certainly one of like the 6 strong candidates. And again, I'm going to name a couple more than just 6. The next of which is the Claw, Kawhi Leonard of the Los Angeles Clippers. Quietly, I'm sure no one's ever used that one before, having a really nice season. 26.6 rebounds, 5 assists per game, 62% true shooting. This is just very consistent with where he's been at the last few seasons. Just rock solid. That's actually a career best true shooting, though, for Kawhi, which is kind of surprising. Not that 62% is anything to scoff at. That's a few points above league average, even in this sort of inflated season. So I'm surprised that's the highest of his career. And then his PER is 26.6. Very good. The Clippers are currently third in the West at 28-16. Again, another team that I think people had really high expectations for. Even, I don't know, because there was so much talk made about their meltdown in the playoffs last season in the bubble. And yet I do feel like people had really high expectations. So even with them sitting third at 28-16, like I think Zach Lowe just came out and said, they can't win a title as currently constructed. I don't know about that. I really don't know about that at all. I think they're fine. They've got a brand new coach. They've had some injuries. Paul George missed a really good chunk of time. He's playing great too. He could almost make this list. But anyway, yeah, they're third in the West at 28-16. Like, that's not bad at all. Kawhi is still a great defensive player. He's not the best wing defender in the league like he was for a few years, but he's still up there. And when he wants to, he can be probably the best still. So that, like similarly with Giannis, probably separates him from a lot of these candidates. And the thing with Kawhi, and this is a little bit with Dame too, like, because if neither one of those guys wins an MVP in their NBA career, they probably go down as 2 of the maybe, 5 best players to never win an MVP, right? Like, so similarly with Dame, it's like, does Kawhi just kind of deserve an MVP at some point? Like, has he been, he's been a finals MVP multiple times. He's won multiple titles with multiple teams. Like, does he deserve an MVP? It's not like we give these things away for charity and it's like, let's give one to Kawhi. But, if he has a good enough season, like, again, I don't think that 26-6-5 and the 28-16 record is quite enough to get it done. But like, if he kind of goes on a tear, the rest of the season and the Clippers maybe end up taking that first spot in the West, and just with all that he's accomplished in his career, and if he plays, 90% of the games this season, he might have a pretty strong case. But he's having a really good season, and for some reason, it's kind of going under the radar. I've almost heard more talk about Paul George than Kawhi, which is interesting. But anyway, he's got to be on my list too. Next up, Luca Doncic, the youngster, just turned 22. How crazy is that? Like a couple weeks ago, just turned 22. Especially crazy when you consider these numbers. 29, 8, and 9. And as insane as those numbers are, they're pretty much on par with where he was at last season. I don't know those exactly, but I know he was right in that range. 59% true shooting. I think this season that's about league average, maybe slightly above. League average is generally like 56. I want to say it's up to about 58 this season. So Luka's right in there. And it was pretty poor in the beginning of the season. So I think if we looked at the last 2 months even, it's probably well into the 60s, I would guess. His shooting has gotten a lot better, not just this season as a whole, but in the last month or two for sure. He just kind of had a rough start, especially with the 3-ball. He was down in like the 20% for a while there. PER 26.7. Again, the shooting has improved a lot. That's going to take his game to the next level. I have always felt and talked about many times that he's a much better shooter than his percentages would lead you to believe. Like, you can just tell watching him shoot, he's a good shooter, okay? Even if he only shoots 75 at the line and 35 from 3, he's better than that. And I could see him getting to the point where he's 38, 39 from 3 and 80 plus from the line for sure, if not higher, sometime soon here, which would just, I don't know how you guard that guy if he really starts knocking down shots. It's scary to think about. Big knock on him, though, is that the Mavs are just 8th in the West at 22-19. They have been playing better. They blew the doors off the Blazers a few nights ago. Not great for Dame's MVP case because this shifts so quick, okay? We'll talk about that a little more later. So I don't know. Luka would probably be in like the bottom 3 of the 9 that I'm going to name here right now, just because, no, even in this season, I don't think anybody from an 8th place team is going to win MVP. It's just not going to happen. Next up is Joel Embiid. Okay, this is an interesting one because prior to his most recent injury, which is a bone bruise in his knee, I probably would have had him as my number 1. I think I did have him as my number 1 MVP case, like, a week and a half ago or whenever that was. Okay, 2 weeks ago for sure. He would have been my number 1 guy. First of all, his numbers are insane. He's averaging 30 points a game, 12 rebounds, 3 assists, 65% true shooting, which is pretty wild considering he's a 7-footer that shoots a shitload of threes. Excuse me, man, I'm sorry. 31.6 PER, second only to the Joker, and I believe that's got to be 3rd or 4th highest of all time if it stands, certainly top 5. The crazy thing about Embiid is his free throw shooting, okay? Not only does he shoot 11.4 attempts per game, but he knocks them down at an 86% clip. Now, I didn't dive that deep into this, but it's something I was wondering about is like how many centers in NBA history have gone to the line that frequently and shot that high of a percentage. Like, I don't know if anybody has attempted 11 free throws on that kind of percentage from the center position. It's wild, and it's definitely something that separates him from a lot of guys. I mean, he lives at the line, and it feels like he never misses. And he's a defensive force, okay? Like, is he the best defensive center in the league? I think there's an argument there. I think he's certainly one of them, definitely all defensive caliber. Philadelphia, again, another strong part of his case is Philly's first in the East. Okay, they're 31-13. Now in these most recent 6 games that he's missed, they have gone 5-1, which at first glance you might be like, oh, well, maybe he's not that valuable. But if you look at the teams they beat in those 5 games, not great. I'd say the Warriors were probably the best of that bunch, if I'm remembering correctly. Here's the thing, though. Like, okay, he's missed. Do I have it listed here? I want to say he's missed 14 games so far this season. Okay, I don't know why I didn't write that down, but I think that's it. And it's like, how many would he have to play to qualify? Not that there's an official qualifier, but just like, what would be the threshold for him to still be able to win MVP? In a 72-game season, I'm thinking 55, okay? Actually, I'm thinking he's missed 13 so far. So that would be like, if he misses 5 more, he falls short of that 55 threshold. Again, that's just an arbitrary number. Maybe it's 50, absolute minimum, but I don't think you can miss 20 games in any season and still win MVP. So, and that's, it's not good because it was reported, I think yesterday that Philly's going to be really cautious, and that should go without saying, but it's sort of implied, I think, that he's going to miss potentially a couple more weeks. If that happens, he's probably out of the conversation as great of a season as he's having. I heard somebody put it, I think it was Danny LaRue actually said that he's like the per minute MVP. I think that's a good way to put it. If you're just looking at the time he's been on the court, he's been the best player in the league this season. I really think he has. But he's missed 13 games. He's going to miss at least a handful more. And even when he is playing, he doesn't play a ton of minutes, so his minutes total is going to be a lot lower than pretty much everyone else on this list, depending on how much time LeBron misses. I think that's it on Embiid. But the last guy I'm going to talk about here is Steph Curry. And look, the Warriors are 9th in the West right now. They are 22-22. They're sitting at 500. They've been a little disappointing, especially to me. I thought for sure they were a playoff team. I think I want to say I had them finishing 6th in the West. I thought they'd be a little better. And look, that's not out of the question by any means. I mean, they're only a few games back of being in that range. But right now they're 22-22. Obviously, nobody's going to win an MVP for a team that's 500 and might miss the playoffs. But let's look at his numbers. And you might see where I'm going with this. 29 points, second highest of his career. 5 rebounds and 6 assists per game. 64% true shooting. 24.8 PER. Other than a couple of seasons, Curry's never been like a huge PER guy. He did lead the league a couple seasons, his MVP season, I think either the one before or the one after, but he's had a lot of seasons in that range. I think it's about his career average. And here's the thing with Curry, though. Okay, so I wish I'd written down his 3-point numbers because they're crazy. They're even crazier than Dame's. I want to say he's making 4.7 at like 41% or something absolutely insane like that. And again, 64% true shooting is pretty crazy for a point guard. Look, if the Warriors go on a run, though, okay, and I'm not saying that's likely, but if they have a really strong finish to the season and they can get even up to like 6, like what it would take from Curry for the Warriors to go on the kind of run that would put them in like the 6th place in the West, that probably bumps his scoring over 30 points a game, his true shooting up. He's out right now. He's got a bruised tailbone. I believe the Jordan Poole show is in full effect, much to my delight. But Curry should be back soon. But that's what it's going to take for him to even have a chance. Right now, he's definitely in that bottom 3 with Luca, and I will go through the order up here next. But yeah, so I figured I should mention him because he's having an incredible individual season, but the team success just hasn't been there yet. So I'm just going to hit you with it. My current MVP order, my ladder, okay? I know what a lot of you that know me well think I'm going to say for the first spot, but again, these things change quickly, okay? I'll just say, like, okay, 2 weeks ago, it was Joel Embiid was my guy, okay? Then, say, a week ago, it was Giannis, okay? But then Dame, and all these guys were near the top already, but then Dame has his 50-point game, incredible clutch performance, and then he goes for like 36 or 38 against the Pelicans and leads an insane comeback in the 4th quarter, another huge clutch performance. That put Dame up to my number 1 ahead of Giannis and ahead of Embiid. But then Dame had a couple of losses. They got smoked by the Mavs. They lost a tough one last night. By the way, I'm recording this on Wednesday afternoon. I should have said that right off the bat, but anyway, Tuesday night they lost to the Nets. That was tough. Man, I'm not going to get into that. It's not what this podcast is about, as Steve would say when we try to talk about the Bucks. So I know you all think I'm going to say Lillard is my number 1 choice, but he is not at this point. Number 1 is Nikola Jokic. I hate to say it, but man, just when I was looking at his numbers, it's like this is really an historically great offensive season. There's no other way around it. Look, I mean, obviously, you watch the guy play, you know how magnificent he is, but something about seeing the numbers on paper might have just pushed him over the top for me. Like, it's just impossible to ignore. And especially now that they're kind of playing better. And I mean, their record's not bad at all. And it will get better. So, and he's been healthy all year. Jokic, number one, has to be, okay? 2 and 3 are really close for me. Damian's number 2, and Giannis is number 3. Number 4, as of right now, it's got to still be Embiid, okay? Even though I can't rule him out either. I don't know exactly when he's coming back. The timetable hasn't been established. Usually that's not a good thing. Usually that means it's going to be a little on the longer side. But we don't know at this point. And if he comes back in a few games, picks up where he left off, Philly holds that number 1 seed, I mean, he might jump right back to the top of this thing. So right now I got to have him 4th. Okay, and that's only because of the missed games. Number 5, I'm going to go with James Harden. I would have probably had LeBron there. But he's just, again, just a few missed games. It doesn't take much to shuffle this ladder around. And again, that's the nature of the beast this year with this MVP race. And that's what makes it so compelling, at least to me. I think to a lot of you guys too, is that it's so close. Like a couple of bad games can knock a guy down a couple spots. A great game can bump a guy up a spot. A few missed games can knock a guy down. So that's how this thing's going, right? That's why I thought it was worth talking about today. So to recap, I got Jokic number 1. Lillard number 2, Giannis number 3, Embiid number 4, James Harden number 5. LeBron's going to be number 6 for now. I'm tempted to put him a little higher. That's one the more I think about it. I mean, by LeBron standards, statistically, individually, it's not the greatest season. It's definitely in the bottom half of his seasons if you're looking at him like that. But the Lakers are really good. And I mean, it's hard to ignore the fact that he is 36. I know that's not something we should be looking at with this. Like, definitely, don't give him the MVP just because he's older. But yeah, anyway, LeBron is going to be number 6. And then we go to Luca at number 7. I got Kawhi at number 8. Curry at number 9. I would say Harden, LeBron, Luca, and Kawhi are pretty much interchangeable on that list. Let me go through it one more time. Again, this is being recorded on Wednesday afternoon, March 24th, 2021. That's Nikola Jokic, Damian Lillard, Giannis Antetokounmpo, Joel Embiid, James Harden, LeBron James, Luca Doncic, Kawhi Leonard, and Steph Curry. So that's my 9 that I teased earlier. But 9, why not just go 10? 10 is a nice round number, okay? And I think I've got a good 10th. And so I was kind of looking at, just again, basketballreference.com, just kind of tooling around with their different stats, looking at, I was trying to find a category that all of these 9 that I named, the 9 best players in the league this year, fit into the top 10 of, okay? So I'm looking at the top 10s of all these different stats, and I'm like, which one contains all 9 of these guys? And there was 2 that I found. One is VORP, VORP, and that one, let's see. I'm sorry. Yeah, VORP and box plus minus were the 2 stats on basketballreference.com that all 9 of these guys were in the top 10 of. And there was the one other guy on VORP was Nikola Vucevic, and the one other guy on the box plus minus was Jimmy Butler. And I think that's the guy I'm going to go with for sort of my 10th to round this thing out, is Jimmy Butler, a.k.a. Jimmy Buckets. Real quick, 21, 8, and 7 this year in the games he's played. And we all know he's missed some time, but 21, 8, and 7 is pretty impressive. That the rebounds and assists are career highs. 59% true shooting, again, just above league average, not bad. 26.2 PER, career high. And Miami has climbed up to 6th. Remember when they were like, are they even going to be able to regain enough ground to make the playoffs? Like, they were really hurting, and a lot of that was because Jimmy wasn't there, which speaks to his value, which I think kind of puts him in this conversation. But Miami now is at 6th in the Eastern Conference at 22 and 22. Isn't that funny? The Warriors are at 9th in the West at 22 and 22, and the Heat are at 6th in the East at 22 and 22. That's kind of how it works. He's missed 14 games this season, okay? So right now that's too much relative to total possible games played to be considered for this award, but there's still a lot of season left. But since his return to the lineup on January 30th, the Heat have gone 16-10, and that they have actually been on a slide. I think as of today, as of the time of this recording, they have lost 4 straight, couple to Indiana. So if you take those away, they were at like 16-6 since his return. So they were really hot, and he's obviously been a huge part of that. So again, that's going to be my 10th guy just to round it out and make it an even 10. And hey, if Miami keeps climbing, if they can they're not going to break into the top 3 in the East. The top 3 in the East is just, again, head and shoulders. But if they can get up to 4th, probably not an MVP, but, could be like a top 5 finish. He'll be on the ballot maybe. And then the last kind of thing I wanted to talk about was some of these past MVP races, okay? Because that's the question, okay? Because I think I listed a few different potential reasons, but I think the main one is that this is a close race, and that's why people are particularly interested in it this season, because it's not only close between a couple guys, like neck and neck, but it's got like parity. Like it's I just listed all the guys. I again, at least 9 of them. You can't completely count out. 6 you really can't count out. And I'm not sure if we've been at that point, midway through the season in years past, or if the top couple have began to separate. But this season, they certainly haven't, okay? There's no clear favorite, in my opinion. Even Jokic, not clear, not a lock by any means, okay? So I went back and just looked at the MVP voting for like the last 30 years. And the most common thing you'll see is one guy runs away with it, okay? And I'm looking at first place votes here, okay? Although second place votes can be important. We'll get to that in a second. But I'm looking at first place votes, and it's usually one guy just runs away with it. It's incredible, actually, like looking at it, how often that happens. It's like, I mean, were they that much better, or is this kind of an instance of groupthink, which I think might be the case? It just kind of becomes agreed upon that this guy's going to be our MVP. That happens in most seasons. Second most common thing you'll see is 2 guys. And in a couple of years, it's been really close at the top. I think it was Duncan and Jason Kidd in 02 were really close. There's been a few races where it's been close at the top. Most often, it's one guy with a lot, 4 times the first place votes of the second guy, and then nobody else below them, okay, getting first place votes. It's just 2 guys, and it's not even that close. That's really common. The thing I was looking for were years in which more than 2 players received a handful, say at least double-digit first-place votes. And that has been a surprisingly infrequent occurrence. First one I hit was 07-08, okay? That was Kobe, Chris Paul, and KG. They each got double-digit first-place votes. Kobe won by a pretty decent margin in terms of the first place votes, but if you look at all the votes factored together, it was actually a pretty close 1-2-3. The next one I came to was that 01-02 season I just mentioned. That was where Duncan, I believe, won the first of 2 straight MVPs for him, but he beat out Jason Kidd and Shaq, and all 3 of them had a fair amount of first place votes. Before that would have been 98-99, the lockout season. The OG lockout season, that's where Karl Malone won it ahead of Alonzo Mourning, and Tim Duncan was 3rd. All 3 of them received a double-digit first-place votes. And then the other one that pops up in the last, I guess, probably 31 years maybe now, was 1989-90. And this one was interesting because it was Magic Johnson, Charles Barkley, and Michael Jordan were the top 3 in that order, and it was close between the 3 of them. The interesting thing was that Barkley, who finished second, actually had more first-place votes than Magic Johnson, but because Magic had so many more second and I think even third-place votes, he ended up winning MVP. So as far as I know, at least in the last 30-something years, this is the only time that the winner of MVP didn't receive the most first place votes. That was weird to think that Barkley did that year. He, of course, won an MVP a couple years later, so he ended up getting his. But I thought that was pretty interesting. That's all to say that I think we could see something like that this season, where it's at least 3 guys, if not 4, receiving double-digit first place votes. Look, maybe I'm underestimating how much it'll narrow down, but I'll be surprised if it ain't 3, if it ain't on that list that I just just named of those 4 years. I think we could be looking at something like that at the very least. So, look, I don't know if it'll end up being able to be called the closest MVP race in NBA history. That seems to come down to sort of how close the top two are in most other years. But I think we could have the most legit contenders. And by legit contenders, I mean guys that get at least a handful of first place votes. But that remains to be seen. This went a little bit longer than I expected it to. Honestly, I was thinking this would be like 15, 20 minutes. I have no idea. And it looks like we're at 50 minutes now anyway. So sorry about the sirens. I live in the city. Little sound effects in the background for you. But anyway, thank you all for listening. Please subscribe if you haven't already. You can subscribe to us on all major audio platforms, including iTunes and Spotify, and I think we're on the Google one now. And then, and of course, YouTube. This particular episode I'm going to release as a kind of YouTube exclusive episode. Like, we want to have some stuff that's only available on YouTube. We're really trying to grow this channel. So if you're watching it on YouTube, which is the only place you could be watching it, and for whatever reason you haven't subscribed yet, just please click that subscribe button. It really does mean a lot to us as we try to get this thing off the ground. And don't forget, you can go to manscaped.com and use the promo code Overstated, OVERSTATED, for 20% off and free shipping. Come on, you can't beat that. So go over to manscaped.com, tell them we sent you, and you'll thank us later, I promise. Anyway, thanks again for listening. Thanks everybody for the support. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.